She said it the way a certain kind of person says things in public, not to inform, but to perform. Her voice was calibrated for the lobby. It was calibrated for witnesses. Do you have any idea what I pay in taxes so that people like you can have a job? The woman who said it was Catherine Weston, CEO of Meridian Aerospace Solutions, 44 years old, the kind of woman who had spent 2 decades building something real, then somewhere along the way started believing the building had made her better than the people inside it. She stood in the marble entrance of Meridian's headquarters in Atlanta, Georgia, at 7:53 in the morning in a white blazer that cost more than a month of the janitor's take-home pay, and she looked at the man holding the mop the way someone looks at a piece of furniture that has been placed wrong. The janitor did not look away. He met her eyes with the particular stillness of a man who has been in rooms far more dangerous than this one, and survived them by staying completely calm. His hands did not tighten on the mop handle. His jaw did not shift. He simply looked at her, level and unhurried, and the quality of that look, the absence of fear in it, was the first thing that made Catherine Weston uncomfortable, though she would not have admitted it in that moment. A large man in a dark suit standing near the elevator bank had gone very still. He was staring at the janitor's face, at a scar that ran along the line of his jaw, thin and pale, barely visible unless the light caught it the right way. The man in the suit knew that scar. He knew where it had come from, and the certainty he had carried into the building that morning about how the rest of his day would unfold had just quietly collapsed. He took a breath. He did not move, because the man he was looking at was not who Catherine Weston thought he was. And what was about to happen in this lobby, and in the weeks that followed, was going to teach everyone in it a lesson that none of them had come here expecting to learn. His name was Marcus Reeves. He was 41 years old. He had been mopping floors at Meridian Aerospace Solutions for 9 months, and he came in at 5:30 every morning before the building woke up, worked through the quiet hours, and was usually finishing the main lobby by the time the executives began arriving. He had placed the wet floor sign 6 feet from where he was working. He always did. That was procedure, and procedure was a thing Marcus Reeves had lived by for a very long time. He had spent 16 years in the United States Army Special Forces, not the kind that gets mentioned at dinner parties, the kind that operates in places that do not have official names on any map that civilians are allowed to see. He had led 12-man teams through mountain passes in temperatures that turned engine oil to paste. He had extracted wounded men from situations that his commanding officers described in closed briefings as unrecoverable, and then he had recovered them anyway. He had made decisions in the space of seconds that determined whether the people around him lived or did not, and he had made those decisions correctly enough, consistently enough, that he had become the person his commanders called when every other option had been used up. He had come home from his last deployment on a Tuesday in November 3 years ago with 2 fractured ribs that hadn't healed right and a Bronze Star he kept in the same drawer as his son's old report cards. His son's name was Caleb. He was 8 years old, serious-eyed, and careful the way children become when they learn early that the world does not make allowances for small people. Caleb's mother, Rachel, had died of a brain aneurysm 2 years earlier on a Sunday morning in their kitchen in Decatur. She had been making eggs. Caleb had been at the table drawing in a sketchbook she had bought him for his birthday. One moment she was there. The next she was on the floor and the eggs were burning, and Caleb was 6 years old and alone in the room with something he could not understand. Marcus had been stateside by then, recently separated from active duty, still adjusting to the specific disorientation of a life that no longer had a mission assigned to it. When Rachel died, the adjustment stopped mattering. Everything stopped mattering except Caleb. He took the janitorial position at Meridian 9 months ago because it paid well enough, asked nothing unreasonable, and ran on a schedule that allowed him to walk Caleb to the bus stop every morning and be standing on the front step when the bus came back in the afternoon. No consulting firm, no private security contract could have promised him that, so he put on the gray uniform and he came in at 5:30 and he did the work without complaint because the work was honest and Caleb was worth every hour of it. On the morning Catherine Weston walked through the front doors at 7:53, Caleb was in the side corridor near the maintenance supply room, sitting on a folding chair with a library book and a bag of trail mix. Marcus had arranged it with the facility's supervisor, a man named Gerald Okafor, who had been running building operations at Meridian for 14 years. Gerald was a quiet, methodical man who believed in doing his job correctly and in not making other people's lives harder than they needed to be. When Marcus had explained the situation, a teacher planning day, no one to watch the boy, Gerald had said only, "Keep him out of the main corridors and he's invisible." That was the full extent of the conversation. Caleb knew how to be invisible. He had learned it from his father. The lobby of Meridian Aerospace Solutions had been designed to communicate something: dark stone floors, a reception desk made of brushed steel and tempered glass, ceilings that rose 40 feet with a single architectural skylight that dropped a column of morning light onto the company's emblem on the floor, a stylized wingspan inside a circle. The building wanted you to feel, the moment you entered it, that you were inside something that mattered. It was good architecture for that purpose. Marcus had finished the east wing and the central corridor and was working on the final stretch of the main lobby when Catherine Weston came through the front doors. She was not scheduled to arrive until 9. Marcus had accounted for that. He would have been done and out of the lobby before anyone at her level typically appeared. But Catherine Weston had moved a call to 7:30 and had driven in early, and she was on her phone before the automatic doors had finished opening, talking in the clipped half-sentences of someone who was already 3 conversations ahead of the one they were having. She crossed the lobby at her usual pace. Her left heel caught the edge of the damp section. She didn't fall. It was less than that, a single sideways lurch, a half step that lasted less than 2 seconds before she recovered her balance, but it happened in front of 2 of her assistants, in front of Gerald Okafor, who had just come around from the service corridor, in front of the morning receptionist, and in front of a young graphic designer named Priya Mehta, who was standing near the elevator waiting for a colleague and who had, for reasons she would later find difficult to explain, not put her phone away. Catherine caught herself, straightened, and then she turned, not with the quick reaction of someone startled, with the slow, deliberate turn of someone who had already decided, in the half-second of the stumble, who was going to be responsible for it. She looked at Marcus, at his uniform, at the mop, at the yellow, wet floor sign standing 6 feet to his left. Something moved across her face that was not quite anger yet. It was the thing that comes before anger when someone of a certain disposition realizes that a small humiliation has been witnessed. Do you see what almost just happened? Her voice had dropped to a register that was somehow worse than shouting. Controlled, precise. The register of someone who has learned that a lowered voice draws more attention than a raised one. Marcus stopped mopping. "The wet floor sign is right there, ma'am." Catherine looked at the sign, then at Marcus, then something shifted in her expression, a kind of recalibration. She had expected silence. She had expected the reflexive apology that came from someone in his position, the immediate shrinking, the "yes, ma'am," and the "sorry, ma'am," and the "I should have put it closer." She had not expected a fact delivered without flinching. She smiled. The smile did not reach the vicinity of her eyes. "I'm sure it is. I'm sure you followed every single item on your little checklist." She let the word "little" land and hold. "Tell me something." She took one step closer, not aggressive, clinical, the way someone takes a step closer when they want to make a measurement. "Is this really where you plan to be? Is this," she gestured at the mop, at the bucket, at the gray uniform, "is this the ceiling you saw for yourself? Or did something go wrong along the way that brought you down here?" The lobby went still. Not dramatically. No one gasped. No one spun around. The quality of the silence changed the way the quality of light changes before a storm, and every person in that lobby felt it. Gerald Okafor, standing 10 feet away, looked at the floor. His jaw worked once. He did not look up. The 2 assistants behind Catherine exchanged the briefest glance. The morning receptionist became very interested in her keyboard. Near the elevator, Priya Mehta's thumb stopped moving on her phone screen. She did not lower the phone. Marcus looked at Catherine Weston with the same level unhurried attention he had once given to situations where staying completely calm was the difference between people going home and people not going home. He let the silence hold for a breath, too. "There's a wet floor sign right behind you, ma'am," he said. His voice was quiet and even. "I put it there so that people would look down before they walked across the floor." He paused. "It works better if you look down instead of looking down on people." One of Catherine's assistants, the younger one, a woman named Beth, who had been with Catherine for 7 and had spent most of those months perfecting the art of being invisible in her presence, drew a sharp breath. It was almost inaudible, almost. Catherine's smile held for 3 seconds longer than it should have. That was the tell. When a smile has to be maintained by effort, it is no longer a smile, it is a position. Then it tightened. "Do you know who I am?" "I know what your sign says in the lobby directory," Marcus said. "Then you know I can have you escorted out of this building in the next 4 minutes." "Yes, ma'am. And you still thought that was worth saying." Marcus looked at her. "I thought it was true. That's usually enough of a reason." Catherine stared at him, and for a moment, a very brief moment that she would spend considerable energy in the following weeks trying to forget, she was the one who looked away first. She turned toward the elevator without another word, her assistants adjusting to catch her pace, and the lobby doors closed behind her. The lobby breathed. Gerald Okafor looked up from the floor finally. He looked at Marcus the way a man looks at something that he is trying to locate a category for. Marcus picked up his mop and returned to work. Priyameta lowered her phone. She looked at the screen. She looked at Marcus. She looked at Gerald. Gerald met her eyes. He did not say anything. He turned and walked back toward the service corridor. Priya stood at the elevator for another 30 seconds. Then she put her phone in her pocket and pressed the button for the 4th floor. The thing about Catherine Weston was that she had not always been this. That was the fact that made what happened next more complicated than a simple story of arrogance and its consequences. She had founded Meridian Aerospace Solutions 12 years ago in a rented office in Buckhead with a business plan she had written by hand in a spiral notebook and 2 engineers who had believed in her enough to work for 6 months at half their market rate. Her father had told her, the week before she signed the first lease, that women did not build defense technology companies, that the field had no room for sentimentality, and sentiment was all she would bring to it. She had proved him wrong in ways that were not small. Meridian now held 11 active government contracts, employed just under 900 people in 3 facilities, and had been listed on the Georgia Business Journal's list of top growth companies for 4 consecutive years. She had built something real, something that mattered, but somewhere in the process of building it, she had adopted the logic that her father had used against her, that power was demonstrated through who flinched first, that authority was confirmed by the size of the distance it put between itself and ordinary things. She had stopped remembering what it felt like to be small in a room. She did not remember it until the morning a janitor didn't flinch. She was at her office by 8:15 on the phone with Meridian's chief legal officer when her assistant Beth knocked and came in quietly. "There's something you should see," Beth said. She placed her tablet on the desk, screen up, and stepped back. A video was playing. 37 seconds, lobby footage taken from a phone held very steadily by someone who had decided in real time that what they were watching mattered. Catherine watched it once. She watched it again. The man in the gray uniform on the screen looked the same as he had looked in person, level, unhurried, completely still. But on screen, with the frame around it, the contrast between the two of them was different than it had felt in the room. In the room, she had felt like herself. On screen, she saw what she had looked like to the 32 people who had been standing within earshot. That was not the same feeling. "How many views?" she said. Beth looked at the tablet. "As of 10 minutes ago, 400,000. Catherine set her coffee down, carefully, the way she set things down when she was deciding something. "Get me the building supervisor. Gerald Okafor is already on his way up. And find out who that man is, the one mopping." Beth hesitated for precisely the length of time it takes a person to decide whether to say the thing they know will not be well received. Then she said it. "That's going to complicate things. Why?" Beth set a second page on the desk. It was a personnel file. Marcus Reeves, 41, 9 months on staff. The background section was brief. Prior military service. Catherine picked up the page. She read it once. Then she read the additional notes that Gerald Okafor had attached when he had filed the hire paperwork, notes he had added because Gerald Okafor was thorough and because something about the applicant had struck him as worth noting. United States Army, Special Forces, 16 years of service, 3 combat deployments, multiple commendations including the Bronze Star Medal, awarded for actions in a classified theater of operations. Honorably discharged, no disciplinary record of any kind. Catherine put the page down. "Get me Gerald," she said. The video did not wait for Catherine's decisions. It had its own momentum. By noon, it had passed 2 million views and had been picked up by 3 national news aggregators. By 3 in the afternoon, a reporter from the Atlanta Journal-Constitution had called Meridian's communications office. By 5, it was on 2 cable news programs framed as a question about power and contempt in American corporate culture, with the 37-second clip playing on a loop in the corner of the screen while anchors discussed what it revealed. In the side corridor near the maintenance supply room, Caleb had fallen asleep in the folding chair with his book face down on his chest. Marcus had finished his shift at 2. He had collected Caleb without waking him immediately. He sat for a moment in the chair beside him and watched his son sleep, the book rising and falling with his breath, and there was something in the quality of that moment, the particular stillness of it, that Marcus did not interrupt. Then he touched Caleb's shoulder, and the boy woke up the way he always did, all at once completely, without the grogginess that most children carried out of sleep. "Ready?" Marcus said. "Yeah," Caleb said. He picked up his book and his trail mix and shouldered his small backpack. "Was today good?" Marcus thought about it. "Today was interesting," he said. Caleb accepted this with the seriousness he gave most things. "That's sometimes better," he said. Marcus looked at his son. "Sometimes," he agreed. The video continued to grow through the night, and with it came something Marcus had not anticipated. Someone, somewhere in the comment section of one of the news aggregator reposts, had recognized the scar on his jaw. Not as a janitorial employee, as something else entirely. The comment read, "That's Marcus Reeves, Echo Team. I served with him in the Panjshir. I owe that man my life." It was one comment among 40,000, but it was the right 41 words in front of the right people. By the following morning, Marcus's service record, the parts of it that were not classified, had been located and cross-referenced by 3 journalists who knew how to find these things. By 7 a.m., the story had turned. The janitor Catherine Weston had publicly humiliated was a 16-year decorated Special Forces veteran who had led operations in 3 active combat zones, who had been awarded the Bronze Star, who had lost his wife 2 years earlier and was raising his son alone and had taken a janitorial job so that he could be there when the school bus came home. A former commanding officer, retired Colonel James Whitfield of the 3rd Special Forces Group, gave a brief statement to a reporter at Fort Bragg. He did not use many words. He said, "Marcus Reeves is one of the finest soldiers I served alongside in 30 years of service. He is the kind of man who makes the people around him better by being present. Whoever spoke to him that way should understand what kind of man they spoke to." The statement ran on every major wire service within the hour. The consequences for Catherine Weston did not come all at once. They came in sequence, each one arriving before she had fully absorbed the previous one, so that the effect was cumulative and disorienting, the way a tide comes in not as a single wave, but as the slow, inevitable rising of the water around you until the ground you were standing on is no longer there. On the 3rd day, 2 members of Meridian's board of directors called an emergency session, not a full meeting, a conversation, the kind that happens over the phone in the evening, with no minutes taken. On the 4th day, Meridian's largest government client, a Department of Defense procurement division that accounted for 31% of the company's annual contract value, notified Meridian's chief operating officer that they were placing their next contract renewal under review pending further assessment. Catherine received that call at 6:47 in the evening. She sat into her office afterward for a long time without making any other calls. On the 6th day, the board held a formal session. Catherine attended. She sat at the head of the table where she had sat for 12 years, and she listened while her board members, People she had hired, people whose careers she had in several cases shaped, discussed the reputational exposure the company now carried. They used the language of corporate governance. They talked about stakeholder confidence and contract liability and institutional credibility. They did not say the word contempt, but it was present in every sentence, the way a smell is present in a room even after the source of it has been removed. At the end of the session, the chairman, a man named Douglas Farrell, who had joined the board in Meridian's third year and who had watched Catherine build the company from a position of genuine admiration, said something she did not expect. He said, "Catherine, before we go further, I want to ask you something, and I want you to hear it as the question it is and not as an accusation." He waited. What happened in that lobby? The room was very quiet. Catherine looked at Douglas Farrell. She looked at the table. She looked at her hands on it. "I was having a bad morning," she said. Yes, Douglas looked at her. "That's what I thought." He let the sentence stand alone for a moment, not as a rebuke, just as a fact that everyone in the room now had to sit with. "Catherine," he said, "you built this company. That is not in dispute. What is in dispute is whether the version of you that exists right now is still the right version to lead it." He paused, and I want you to think about that before the next session. Not what the board thinks, what you think. The next session was 2 days later. Catherine resigned the morning before it, signing the paperwork herself in the presence of her attorney. She insisted on that. She wanted the departure to be hers, even when nothing else about the outcome was. She left the Meridian building for the last time on a Friday evening. She walked out through the lobby, the same marble floors, the same 40-foot ceiling with the skylight dropping its column of light onto the company emblem. The lobby was empty at that hour. The cleaning staff came in early mornings. The receptionist had gone home. Catherine stood in the lobby alone for a moment. She was not certain why she had come through the front entrance instead of the parking garage. She had simply done it, and now she was standing where she had stood 2.5 weeks earlier, and the lobby was the same and she was not. She looked at the floor, at the place where the damp section had been, at the spot where the yellow wet floor sign had been standing when she had chosen not to see it. She left without another word. The letter arrived 11 days later. It came in a plain white envelope addressed to Gerald Okafor's office at the building management address, because Catherine did not have Marcus's home address and had not tried to find it. Gerald called Marcus to let him know it had arrived. Marcus drove to the building on a Saturday and sat in Gerald's office and opened it. It was not a short letter. It was not a polished one. There were places where the handwriting changed pressure, where a word had been crossed out and rewritten, where the pen had moved more slowly, as if the person writing it had needed to stop and gather something before continuing. Catherine wrote that she had watched the video 14 times. She wrote that the first 9 times she had watched it looking for the place where she had been misrepresented, and that by the 14th viewing she understood there was no such place. She wrote that she had built Meridian after her father told her a woman had no business in defense technology, and that in proving him wrong, she had somewhere adopted the same instrument he had used against her, the idea that authority proved itself by what it diminished. She wrote that she understood none of this was his burden to carry. Near the end of the letter, she wrote one sentence that Marcus read twice. "I spent years learning to walk into rooms as if the people in them were furniture. In 30 seconds, you made a room full of witnesses understand what that looks like from the other side." She did not ask for forgiveness. She did not ask him to intervene with the board or the government contracts or the news coverage that was still running. She asked for nothing at all. She ended the letter with 5 words. "I am sorry, I'm starting." Marcus folded the letter and set it on Gerald's desk. Gerald knocked once and came in. "You all right?" Gerald said. Marcus looked at the folded paper. Then out the window at the parking lot, which was empty on a Saturday, the Georgia sun flat and white on the asphalt. "Yeah," he said. "I am." He drove home. He picked up Caleb from the neighbors, and they went to Piedmont Park that afternoon, a ritual they kept Saturdays when the weather allowed. Marcus carried a thermos of coffee, and Caleb carried his sketchbook, because Caleb had decided several months ago that he wanted to draw things he saw in the world and had been cataloging the park with the systematic determination he applied to most projects he took seriously. They found their usual bench near the east end, under a stand of water oaks whose shade spread out across the grass in the early afternoon. Marcus filled the cap of the thermos and held it in both hands. Caleb sat beside him with his sketchbook open, studying a cluster of sparrows moving through the underbrush with the focused attention of a naturalist. After a while, Caleb said, without looking up from the sketchbook, "Dad, the thing that happened at work." Marcus turned his head. "Yeah, did she apologize?" "She started to." Caleb considered this. He drew a line in the sketchbook. "Nat's book, then another. Is starting enough." Marcus looked at his son, at the way he held his pencil, at the sketchbook in his lap with its pages filling up week by week, a record of things Caleb found worth looking at. "Starting is how everything real begins," Marcus said. Caleb nodded slowly, the way he nodded when he was filing something rather than agreeing with it. He kept drawing. The sparrows moved through the underbrush. The water oaks turned in a light wind above them. Marcus held the thermos cap and thought about something that had taken him most of his adult life to understand, and that he had not been able to articulate even to himself until recently. In 16 years of service, he had been trained to understand strength as capacity, the capacity to move, to act, to carry, to decide. That definition had served him well in places where the alternative to strength was death. He did not regret a single minute of it. But there was another kind of strength that none of his training had covered, the kind that allowed a man to stand in a lobby in a gray uniform, to be looked at as if he were furniture, and to not disappear, not to yell, not to crumble, not to perform his own smallness to make someone else's arrogance more comfortable. The kind that allowed him to say a true thing quietly, with no anger in it, and to trust that the truth was enough. He had spent 2 years after Rachel died trying to locate that strength, trying to understand what he was made of when the mission was gone and the uniform was gone, and it was just him and a 6-year-old and a house that still held the specific silence of someone who was no longer in it. What he had found slowly was this, that what he had built in 16 years of service was not a set of skills. It was a character, and character was the only thing that remained fully yours when everything else had been taken. Dignity, he had come to understand, was not the absence of injury. It was the refusal to let injury determine your next move. Caleb looked up from the sketchbook and held it out to Marcus. On the page was a drawing of the water oaks, rough and quick, the shapes of them recognizable but not precise, with sparrows in the underbrush rendered as small dark marks that somehow conveyed exactly the quick, irreducible energy of the birds. "Good," Caleb said. Marcus looked at the drawing for a long time. "Really good," he said. Caleb took the sketchbook back. He studied the drawing himself, turning it slightly in the afternoon light, the way an artist checks a work not for approval but for the private assessments of what it actually is. "Dad," he said, "yeah, if someone is mean to you again, what are you going to do?" Marcus thought about it. He looked at the trees, at the light coming through the leaves, the way late afternoon light in Georgia moves like water through the canopy, shifting and unhurried. "Tell the truth," he said, "same as always." Caleb looked at him with the gray, serious eyes that had seen too much too early and had somehow remained clear. "And if telling the truth isn't enough," Marcus put his arm around his son, "then I'll still be your dad first, and we'll figure out the rest from there." Caleb leaned against him. He accepted this the way he accepted most true things, completely, without needing to examine it further. He turned back to his sketchbook and began a new page. Marcus held his coffee and watched the afternoon change. The light came down through the water oaks the way it comes down in Georgia in October, slowly at first and then all at once. The park moved around them. People ran the gravel path at the perimeter. A dog moved through the grass ahead of its owner with the free, uncalculated happiness of a creature with no distance between itself and what it wants. Caleb drew. Marcus watched, and in the particular unhurried peace of that hour, Marcus Reeves understood something clearly. He had spent 16 years protecting something. He had not always known what it was. He had told himself it was the country, the mission, the people beside him. And those things were true. But underneath them, the thing he had actually been protecting all along was this: a Saturday afternoon in a park in Georgia. A boy with a sketchbook and a clear-eyed way of looking at the world, the ordinary, specific, irreplaceable texture of a life that belonged to him. Not a title, not a record, not a reputation that needed defending. There is something this story keeps returning to, and it is not the video or the board meeting or the resigned CEO or the government contract review. It is a man in a gray uniform who did not disappear when someone decided he should. Most of us have stood in a version of that lobby. Maybe not with a CEO in a white blazer, maybe not with anyone watching, but most of us have been in a room where someone looked at us and decided in the space of a breath that we were less than what we are. And most of us know the pull of that moment, the urge to make ourselves smaller, to apologize for the inconvenience of our existence, to hand over our dignity, because holding on to it seems more costly than letting it go. Marcus did not do that. Not because he had nothing to lose, he had everything to lose. But he had learned in 16 years of carrying other people through the worst versions of circumstances that your worth is not something another person can take. They can refuse to see it. They can perform its absence. They can build a whole lobby around the idea that it doesn't exist. But the taking only happens if you participate. The other thing this story is about is simpler and harder at the same time. It is about what we show the people who are watching us. Every day, in the small unannounced moments, our children and our colleagues and the strangers standing near the elevator bank are learning something from how we inhabit our own dignity. Marcus knew Caleb was in the building that morning. He knew his son was in the side corridor with a library book, eating trail mix in earshot of the lobby. And he chose not to be heroic, not to perform, not to teach, but simply to be exactly who he was. To tell the truth, to hold his ground without raising his voice. That is the only lesson that stays with a child long after the morning is over. If this story made you think of someone who carries that kind of quiet strength, someone who never needed the room to acknowledge them but held their grip anyway, drop their name in the comments, or just the word present. Because sometimes the people who deserve to be seen the most are the ones who never ask to be. And if you've ever been in that lobby, if you've ever been the person someone looked past, we want to hear about it. Not the anger part, the part where you decided not to disappear. That's the story worth telling. If this story stayed with you, I'd love to hear your thoughts in the comments. Have you ever witnessed someone being underestimated, only to discover who they really were? Share your story below. And if you want more stories like this, stories about ordinary people with extraordinary hidden depth, hit that subscribe button. I'll see you in the next one.